worry about the the working of the PDS and how to efficiently distribute this food grains to the poor people. Food subsidy is too much. If the people are getting at 1 rupee, 2 rupee rice and wheat, then what is the implication for farmers' incentives for production?
The government's ambitious food security bill has now got a cabinet nod after much delay and is ready to be introduced to the parliament for clearance. On We Mean Business tonight, we deliberate whether the bill in its current form is worth being passed. Does it set out to accomplish what it intends to do, and if not, is it worth burdening the government's finances with such largesse at a time when the top worry of the finance minister seems to be the fiscal deficit? We'll also debate how smooth the ride would be in the parliament for this bill given the hot political climate, and whether the opposition parties will let the legislation go through and have the Congress hog all the credit ahead of the elections. Joining me on the debate tonight, Ritika Khera, Associate Professor, Institute of Economic Growth; Devinder Sharma, Food Policy Analyst, joins us from Chandigarh; Aditi Fadnis, Political Editor of the Business Standard; and Brinda Jagidar, Independent Economist, joins us here in our Mumbai studios. She was, of course, formerly with the State Bank of India. Before we begin our discussion, though, I had a chance to speak to noted economist Y.K. Alag, who's done some seminal work on this area, and I began by asking him what his critical concerns were about the final provisions of this bill and whether he feels it should go through in this current form.
This is a very difficult kind of objective to meet because basically what happens is that what are called the chronically undernourished are around, on an average, around a fifth of the population. Although in some segments of the population and in some areas, for example, girls and women in some backward regions, it can be much higher. Generally, the experience has been that you want extensive coverage, otherwise the really hungry get left out. But on the other hand, the entitlement should be more restrictive. So you are it's a difficult objective to meet, and I have a lot of sympathy with what the government is doing. One of the things we have to remember is that very poor people also now don't only require grain, and the nutrition aspect, I mean, for example, a glass of milk to a lactating mother will probably be far more important, and maybe even some animal husbandry products, because a large number of the malnourished are really castes which are not vegetarian, so an egg maybe or something like that. Now, so therefore if you have just a large coverage and don't concentrate on the really hungry, the legislation does provide that the states can supplement what the center is doing. But the way the fiscal situation at the state level is, I'd be highly surprised if the states tend to develop what I would call a nutrition package rather than a grain package.
Right, so but the Antodaya Anna Yojana continues, so does that in some sense address at least the concern partially of not having universal coverage? I know we still have to talk about the non-green side of it, but at least in terms of the universal coverage, does that Yojana in some sense address that concern?
I'm not quite sure, because the Antyodaya program is somewhat selective and not every state follows it, and the problem has been that if you don't have universal coverage, there is a lot of experience to show. I think I've talked about it with data. Abhijit Sen has a paper with Himanshu which shows that if you don't have extensive coverage, the really poor get left out. It's more a social kind of thing. In the sense that if you go to a village, until we had the Manrega, basically the residents of the Kabirwada would not even be there when you are discussing things in the Chaupal. So they tend to get left out, and Antyodaya has these objectives, but yet we know survey after survey, 18 to 20% of the population is malnourished. Now that's India can afford to lick that problem. So I think the attempt is in the right direction. But if you just give grain to a very large number of people, that then, is not really solving the hunger problem.
Right, so with this, whole idea of a universal coverage, is that in some sense a bit utopian? Because that would then bring about the questions of us having enough grains. Also, can we afford increased outlays at this point in time? Because that would put pressure on the fiscal deficit, which the government clearly cannot afford right now.
I think we should start in any case. As you know, Nikhil, I mean, when we start these things, they start in a very, very small plane. I mean, Manrega started on a very small plane. I mean, it takes time for the states to mobilize themselves. These things take time. I mean, I am not very critical of the fact that Mr. Chidambaram has only provided 10,000 crores additional to all the other programs that you've talked about. It takes time to gear up and to get these things organized. So, beginning this year seems okay. I don't think that you start, the big pressure will come this year or not even next year. But sooner or later, I think you'll have to worry about things like, I mean, let's look at it this way. If you give everybody 3 kilos or 5 kilos of grain, I mean, my wife or your family, what will they do? They are much too bright to let this opportunity go. They'll buy the grain and they'll sell it back in the market. And therefore, there will be some kind of an equilibrium, apart from the fact that the state will have a loss. But, I mean, I don't see people consuming that much of grain. So, but its fiscal effects, if it is not targeted and is very widespread and is largely only grain, well, I think then it's not just a fiscal effect, it's also the agriculture effect, and we need to worry about these things. What I suspect is that many of these things will iron themselves out through time. On balance of considerations, as they say, maybe I'm an optimistic kind of lighter, but I think we should start the whole process.
Right. And so let's then now come to the point that you raised on the fact that non-cereals are not part of the act. Would that, are you worried that that would in some sense propel farmers to further produce cash crops and ignore non-cereals, which is really where food inflation is coming from, your eggs and vegetables and fruits?
Well, I mean, if you only keep it grain and you're going to shove in the grain anyway, whether people want it or not, then obviously you'll have to give high incentives for that. And the farmer is clever. If you raise the price, he'll keep on producing that. So that will have, I've modeled these alternatives for Indian agriculture, and really over an 8-10 year period, if you diversify agriculture, if you grow, put in infrastructure, first stage processing, then in fact poverty goes down faster, because agricultural growth of that kind is, very poverty alleviating. This year, the economic survey also carries some calculations from the World Bank to that effect. I mean, we've done these things 3-4 years earlier. So there are those dangers. But I think correctives set in pretty soon. And the corrective should be that ultimately we should end up targeting more. What are called the leakages should become much less, and we should start giving the vulnerable population something a little more than grains. That will balance the whole. Please remember that the income elasticity of demand for non-grains amongst the poor population is quite high. I mean, these are not air conditioners. Very poor people drink milk, they eat eggs, and sooner or later I think that will have to be factored in by things like, as you said, the Antyodaya, or versions of that kind, which will have to focus the food security program.
Right. So, just coming back to the point that you raised also on fixing the sort of back end, the supply chain and so on, is the PDS, the rest of the enabling infrastructure in some sense right now strong enough to push this law through? And if not, how much of this largest really risks being wasted to pilferage and corruption?
Corruption, not necessarily, I mean the leakages, and you can call that pilferage. You're absolutely right. If you don't target, if you don't develop special programs, the bill leaves it to the states, which I find a terrible weakness. And then it becomes a grain giveaway, which has all the bad consequences we talked about. So the sooner we remedy that, the better off the country will be, and more important, the fewer hungry people we'll have.
Right, so but the government of course is hoping that the use of Aadhaar in some sense would mitigate some of those concerns and stop those leakages. Would that work? And also, couldn't something like this have been done through the cash transfers mechanism when the rest of the subsidy regime is moving in that direction? What's your sense in that?
I'm all in favor of Aadhaar, and I have all the questions that you have. And if it was just Aadhaar, then we'd be all right. But let's go to a village. Come to any village. I went to one about 2 weeks ago. In fact, in the village that I went to, cash transfers meant that under Manrega, that something that people were getting earlier, they're not getting anymore. So this segment of the population, listen, I was the first one who said that even the fertilizer subsidy, you must, in 5 districts to begin with, move over to a direct transfer. Now they made it 50, and then they never implemented it. So the point is, these things, as you say, you have to experiment, move in the right direction. Where there is an NGO, where there is Akshapatra, I think Aadhaar will work. But if you're going off to a place which doesn't even have roads, and where we know that pilferage takes place in delivery, Aadhaar by itself is not going to do. You are right, the direct transfer thing of giving grain will also have leakages, but at least it will meet a significant part of the targeted population.
All right, Dr. Y.K. Alag there speaking to me earlier. But with that, let's throw this open to our panelists on the show. And I will begin with Professor Khera. Ma'am, how much of those concerns do you resonate with? Are you happy with the current draft that's been cleared by the cabinet? And if not, what are some of the key areas which need to be ironed out before this bill actually becomes a law?
Okay, actually I have quite a lot to say and also to react to what Professor Alag was saying earlier. I think the clearing of this act by the cabinet is a welcome step, even though I think they should have been taking 3 steps forward. They've only taken 1.5 steps forward. Let me tell you what is good about this act. One very important thing is that today less than half of the rural population has access to the PDS. This bill is going to take that to 75% in rural areas. Similarly, in urban areas, it's going to almost double coverage. That's one very important step forward. The second thing is that the Antyodaya program is really a lifeline for 2.5 crore households across the country in all states, contrary to what Professor Alag was saying. And this program will remain untouched. These households will continue to get 35 kilos per month, and that's a good thing. The bit that didn't get done, and which is a pity, is that the children's entitlements have been diluted. The Supreme Court has certain orders protecting their entitlements under the ICDS program. Not all of those provisions have been brought into the bill, and they should have been. That's one thing that's missing. The second thing that's missing, which is only in the enabling provision, I believe, are the old age pensions, social security pensions like widow pensions, which are 200 rupees or 300 rupees per month. So I think that should have been there. As far as delivery mechanisms are concerned, I think this bill actually builds on the positive experiences of many states across the country now, something that we have been seeing in the past 5 years. So let me give you a small example. Tamil Nadu runs a universal PDS where leakages have always been very low, less than 10%, in fact 4% according to the most recent data. But even in basket cases, even in states like Chhattisgarh and Orissa, there has been a huge improvement over the past 5 years. So let me again give you an example. Leakages have fallen from approximately half in Chhattisgarh to just 10%. In Orissa, they've gone from 75% to just 30%, and I'm not saying 30% is acceptable, but what I'm saying is that this really shows that one can fix the problem. That this is a system where if the political powers put their power, back it, then we can fix it and we can make it work. Right. And why do we need to make it work? Because even before we think about nutrition, actually I think for a lot of people hunger is something that they are still worried about.
Right. Let me take that to Devinder Sharma, ma'am. The point that you made on leakages, Devinder Sharma, are there enough checks and balances in this bill to ensure that that leakages are minimized? Is the Aadhaar ecosystem, for instance, strong enough to support this kind of an exercise? Is our PDS strong enough to support this kind of exercise? There might have been improvements, but we're talking about a huge amount of money that's going to be that the government's going to be spending.
Well, I don't know. When it comes to feeding the poor, the nation starts talking about, where is the money going to come from. But when we try to bring in the salaries increasement, salary increase for the employees, nobody ever raises the question, where will the money come from? The Sixth Pay Commission came, and Sixth Pay Commission, I think, is costing more than 1 lakh crores. Center and the state governments put together more than that every year, and nobody has ever asked this question, where does the money come from? And I don't think the employees really deserved a pay rise. But having said that, I think feeding the nation is a very important role for any government for that matter, and I think successive governments in India have failed to do that. Now the point I'm trying to make here is that
so the point that we're trying to make is it going to be channelized to the right people? That's the point.
Okay, let me come to that. The way the PDS has been designed today, it is very clear that it's like an old wine in the new bottle. They haven't done any much improvement in this. In fact, the number of beneficiaries have actually come down in the new PDS or the new food security bill that we talk about. I perhaps would have expected something more to happen, which was out of the box. What I would have looked at it, or what I would have expected the government to do, because it was a historic opportunity to ensure that food security is linked to self-reliance. Because after all, what happens is, if you want to feed, there's an old saying that if you want to feed a man for a day, give him fish. But if you want to feed him for the lifetime, teach him how to catch fish. So here was an opportunity that instead of doling out these food entitlements year after year, we could have made people become self-reliant. After all, 6.5 lakh villages in India, out of which about 5.5 lakh villages produce food. Why is it that there are people in the same village which export food or which sell food for the markets are going to bed hungry? I would have looked at a model where at least these 6.5 lakh villages could have become self-dependent or self-contained or self-reliant as far as food security is concerned. Except for Maharashtra, Kerala, and to some extent Tamil Nadu, all other states have now become almost self-sufficient in wheat and rice. So I think each state can take care of its own food security rather than dependent upon a centralized model of distribution of food. That I think is more important. But your other question, whether Aadhaar would meet that goal, I think that will be a very sad trajectory if it all happens. We talk a lot about America, but we don't know that in America much of the benefit goes to Coca-Cola, to General Motors, to JP Morgan Chase. They are the ones who are raking in profits in the name of distributing food coupons and so on. And if the benefit is not passing to the beneficiaries even in America, I think let's not pick up a wrong model and implement in India, because we have not seen how it works.
Before I get an Aditi and Dr. Jagad, I just want to take that point across again to Professor Khera. Do you agree with what Devinder Sharma says, that you do not really need to pick up a wrong model? Don't dole out food, empower people to produce food.
Yeah. So I think that actually we are already moving towards decentralized procurement. 10% of paddy is now procured in Andhra Pradesh, another 10 in Orissa, another 10 in Chhattisgarh. So that model that Devinder Sharma is talking about is already happening in India. Of course, these things will happen slowly. You can't expect this sort of thing to happen overnight. I do believe that this is a very important social security network for people, a safeguard for people, and that it plays a very important role in that sense, because if they are well fed today, they can invest in their education, they can invest in their health. So it is not just doling out fish to them, it is also allowing them to repair their fishing nets and enable them to catch better fish in the future.
Right. And Aditi, not only is it socially very, very important, also for the government, for the UP government, for the Congress government in particular, this is a very, very politically important bill. It was a promise that was made in 2009. They're doing this right now 1 year before the election. So in some sense, the Congress will push all it can to get this passed.
Oh yeah, surely. And Mrs. Gandhi has been calling up KV Thomas at regular intervals and asking what is the problem with the food security bill, why it is not being passed. She has expressed her anguish privately at party fora, to MPs, etc. So that shows the anxiety of the Congress party to have this passed, and quite rightly. I mean, this is something that is going to bring a lot of goodwill for the Congress on the table, and the best part of it is it's not going to cost as much as we thought originally it was going to cost. So I think it's a very important move, and it's something that for some reason the Congress party is simply not trying to publicize as much as it should. I mean, it is a very, very important initiative.
But Dr. Jagidar, Aditi says it's not going to cost as much as we think it is. The finance ministers, I think, given 10,000 crore rupees in the budget. He says that there's a provision for more. Are we undermining the cost of this exercise? The food subsidy bill is going to go up from 85,000 crore rupees to 1.25 trillion rupees. And if you want to have universal coverage, you want to feed everybody, possibly we're going to need more money going ahead.
You've heard Dr. Alag and you've heard the other speakers. This is by far the largest program of its kind in the world. So here we are dealing with a huge big problem, and surely you cannot talk of growth going forward without taking care of a huge chunk of the population. And one thing which I feel is that here they've tried to move towards universalization. They've done away with the APL BPL distinction, and they've set out certain criteria. Now certainly what this is going to do is to push up the cost. So as you said, the cost for the fiscal deficit is going to go up, but let us look at the way in which we can improve efficiencies. If say we are able to save even about 20% by basing it on the Aadhaar and making the implementation, streamlining the implementation, then we will be able to bring down the deficit. It will probably be closer to what we have, maybe around 1 lakh crore as against about 85,000 crore. So the increase will be small. It will not be such a huge substantial amount. So that is one thing, looking at it from the efficiency point of view. The second concern would be on growth. If you're going to divert funds for this food security by cutting down on the planned expenditure, then tomorrow's growth is going to get affected. Here I feel that this is a chance for us to perhaps go in for something like the second green revolution. Remember the first time when we had the crisis in 65, that's when we began the whole thing. So this is a time to look at how can we increase our productivity, how can we increase our efficiencies, and I think that's something very, very doable, and the focus needs to shift over there. China, for example, has almost the same amount of arable land as India, but it produces something like more than 400 million tons of food grains, and we have something like 250 million tons of food grains. So we have a huge opportunity to scale up, and we have a huge opportunity to look at the entire supply chain, right from production to distribution, logistics, bringing it to the consumer.
But how is this bill looking at any of that? I mean, what it's doing is essentially increasing the number of beneficiaries under PDS. It's excluding non-cereal, non-rice, non-wheat products, which means that MSPs for these products will go up, inflation in the system will go up, and it would create further imbalances in terms of protein items and so on.
I'm saying that this gives you an opportunity to look not just at this, but take it as a bigger problem in the larger context, not only as at one particular section, but look at the whole thing that needs to be fixed. So look, this will bring a greater focus on agriculture, and that's what I'm saying is this is a time we have to feed more people, and we need more food grains. So it's time to move on with the second revolution, the second green revolution, the second set of reforms in agriculture.
Mr. Sharma, how do you react to what Professor Alag had to say about the creation of imbalances? You, in some sense, are pushing farmers to produce more cash crops like rice and cereal. You're driving up the MSPs because that's where the demand is going to be. And even the Reserve Bank of India, for instance, has spoken about the fact that we don't lay too much emphasis on protein-rich items, on fruits and vegetables. So that part of inflation, which has been rising by 40% in any case every year, is going to further go up.
Well, I would beg to differ with Professor Alag, because I had expected him to be very straight and curt rather than going around and around. But anyway, having said that, I personally believe that it is not going to increase inflation, because the feeling that we have is that inflation in this country is because of supply constraint. Let me tell you, there is no shortage of food in this country. If there is the inflation that we are seeing happening in this country, it's because the middleman has not been taken care of, and that government doesn't want to do it, because bringing in essential commodities Commodities Act would mean you are going against the economic reforms that you talk about. So I think there is no intention of the government to contain inflation. And also there is no shortage of food in this country. And I've always said from 2001 onwards, if you see, the country had on an average had a surplus about 60 million tons. This year it was 66 million tons. By the end of April, we are going to have 90 million tons of surplus. And I don't understand how can a hungry country, hungry nation be exporting food. You know, it's very criminal that your people are living in hunger and you are exporting food. I think 60 million tons on an average, when we see, if you stack one bag of grain over another bag of grain, another bag of grain, we could actually walk up to the moon and come back. Now this is the quantity of food lying in India, and we are worried about exporting. We are worried about how to feed the country. I think let's begin with, and I'm sure there is no dearth of or capacity building as far as agriculture is concerned. It can happen as we go along when there's a need. As much as the demand the farmers can produce in this country, but they need to be given an adequate price for that. I think that's the model of agriculture which should extend to food security, has to be linked with also agriculture production and the trade policies. I think it's a broader ambit which is very important in this particular case.
Right. Professor Khera, you wanted to come in and also respond to the other argument. Really, the stark difference across income classes lies in the level of spending on non-cereal foods, in fact, and not really on cereals, which really means that more and more people can actually now afford cereals. So if you discount non-cereals from this bill, are you really helping? Are you only creating more imbalances?
Yeah, so on the cost, let me put some facts in front of you. Currently, the expenditure on the same schemes, because the food security bill includes ICDS, midday meals, Janani Suraksha Yojana, maternity entitlements, and the PDS. That total is between 90,000 crores and 1 lakh crores. This bill is going to raise it from 1 lakh crores to about 1.25 lakh crores. So that's an increase of 25,000 crores. Okay. Now this whole thing is around 1% of the GDP. The increase in the food bill is going to be 25,000 crore rupees, which is less than the tax break that is being given to the gold and diamond sector. So we can afford it. Second thing, that in terms of grain, the requirement is going from 58 million tons to about 62 million tons. So it's an increase of just 4 million tons. Again, we can very well afford it, and Mr. Devinder Sharma has already talked about the embarrassing level of stocks in this country. The government does not know what to do with it. Some of it is rotting, and this is the best way that the government can get rid of that headache. But also, it's like a win-win situation. You can get rid of your stocks.
Just on this issue of grain requirement, like you rightly said, 61 million tons is needed annually for the program. Aditi, the government is not going to have a problem in the first year because of its stockpile, but is this bill going to become increasingly difficult really in the subsequent years to implement when your stockpile starts getting eroded?
No, we are already procuring. The government is having a problem getting rid of the stocks that they are procuring. The obvious way to do it is to release it in the PDS or to export as they are doing. Now, I think it's better to release it in the PDS and to feed all the hungry people in our country. Now, going on to the point of diversification of diets that you had raised, this is a very important issue, right? The diets of the Indian poor are too cereal heavy, and this bill can actually even contribute to that. Why? Because instead of buying rice at 20 rupees a kilo, now they'll be able to buy at 3 rupees a kilo, and every 17 rupees that they save, they can spend either on vegetables or fruits or eggs or pulses or whatever it is. So even though the bill is, I would of course prefer the bill to also include edible oil and pulses, and in fact some states are already doing it. Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Himachal Pradesh, all these states provide pulses and edible oil, and I think the trend is in that direction. So I think they're moving in the correct direction, but like you said, the Congress is moving way too slowly.
Aditi, because the other argument, the other completely divergent argument about this would be the fact that you're moving too much into a welfare economy. We already have a massive, subsidy burden to take care of. The finance minister said he wants to restrict subsidies to 2%. If this bill itself is going to make up 1.2% of your subsidy, you will also have to curb expenditure on the other side, and that's not warranted at this point in time, because if you curb expenditure on the fuel side, for instance, it adds up to inflation.
My understanding is that what was happening till now was a welfare measure, and this is an entitlement measure now. So I think there's a difference between what welfare is and what an entitlement is. An entitlement puts the onus of providing what you demand as right on the citizen. So if that means that the government is now going to spend more on getting people their entitlement, so be it.
Dr. Jageda, I mean, this whole issue of, the subsidy bill, 1.2% out of the 2% which the government wants to cap at, if this bill is going to make up 1.2%, is there a serious threat that the rest of the subsidies could be curtailed, that the rest of the expenditure could be curtailed, and what's the potential impact of that on the economy?
That's true. We need to cap the overall subsidy bill, and as you rightly said, that, and I think the government also indicated that they want to progressively move towards bringing down the subsidy. So I think that is fine. How can we do this? Because on one side we have the food bill going up, and the other side there are other subsidies. So like I said even earlier, we need to broaden the debate and not look only at food. How can we increase efficiencies on the fuel side? Like for example, why can we not focus more on renewable energy? And even in the US you have this this requirement of mixing ethanol with gasoline. So let us look at, I'm not sure how is this going. I mean, I'm just this thought comes to my mind that we need to look at other subsidies also and see how we can reduce it, because here we are assuming that all the subsidies are going to keep on increasing, and here the food subsidy is going to add something more. One is we can keep the food subsidy in check, like I said, through by basing it on Aadhaar and bringing it down.
But you heard what Dr. Alag had to say about Aadhaar and about cash transfers. These are not issues that have been fixed.
No, these are not issues that have been fixed, but then we are moving to it. Like he also said, let's make a beginning, let's move on. So let's see first how we can reduce the wastages, the leakages in the PDS. So try to fix that, so that will take care of some savings on the subsidy, on the food subsidy side. The second thing will be the other subsidies, fertilizer subsidy, fuel subsidy. How can we get those down? So there we have to increase efficiencies. Again, I'm coming back to my point by saying that we need to look at this in the larger context.
And, we know what measures the government takes when it comes to efficiencies. That's really not at the top of their mind at this point in time. It's really quick fix solutions. So if the government cannot really focus on efficiencies, is there a serious threat that other expenditure, other subsidies could be curtailed?
I think the government is aware of this. That's why you heard the finance minister also make the statement that he really is going to try to bring down the subsidy bill. So subsidies as a percentage of GDP, they are looking at progressively winding it down, bringing it down. So I think we must let's take this first step, and we have to work towards this to bring down the subsidy, because otherwise, yes, we will have a serious problem on our hands. But if we are able to bring down the subsidy bill, then it's very good. This is a very good first step.
Right. Professor Khera, the other issue, and this is of course related to the nitty-gritty of the bill, is the fact that states have the autonomy now to decide the number of beneficiaries without the centre actually giving them guidelines or other methods on how to do that. In the absence of universal coverage, what makes us think that we won't have warped and skewed below poverty line surveys, and that the right people would actually get this subsidy?
Yeah, so actually this bill does take a step forward in that direction. What it does is nationally we'll cover 75% in rural areas, but this will vary by state according to the poverty in that state. So in states like Orissa, Jharkhand, Bihar, the coverage may go up to 80 or 90%, whereas in the richer states like Punjab, Haryana, it may be lower at 30-40%, right? Now if you go to coverage of about 80% or 90%, the chances of doing it badly are minimized, right? That's one thing. I'm in favor of giving states some flexibility in coming up with the criteria. So let me give you one simple example. A pakka house in Jharkhand is certainly a sign of wealth, but in a state like Himachal Pradesh, it's a necessity. It might be the cheapest available material to build a house over there. So that's why some flexibility is a very good thing. Quickly, if you allow me, I'd like to make a small comment on Aadhaar. I'm slightly amused that everyone thinks that it's going to help you target these subsidies better. You know, my biometric, I mean, they hardly collect any data. They only have my name and address and my biometrics, and that's not going to tell anyone about whether I'm rich or poor. So what you really need is technology such as the one employed in Chhattisgarh and Tamil Nadu, which is end-to-end computerization, using SMS facility, putting in place grievance redressal mechanisms, and a lot of these learnings from the different states have been brought into the bill. We have learned from these states that if you reduce the prices, if you expand the coverage, if you digitize PDS lists, then the leakages will come down, and we have seen that happen. It's not hypothetical, it's not theory. This has actually happened in 2 or 3 states already. So I'm quite hopeful and optimistic that the bill can fix and help us use the subsidies that we are already, you know, these expenses are already being made, but the bill provides us an opportunity to actually ensure that it reaches a lot of poor people in the country.
Mr. Sharma, you know, just that point on Aadhaar, is that the right sort of backbone to rely on? Because I think the government is going to rely on the Aadhaar. It's an Aadhaar-enabled sort of system that we're going to follow, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, before I answer your question, can I go back to the earlier question that you asked about the welfare state, the role that the state wants to abandon? You know, I think whenever we talk of subsidies, we all aim at or look at the subsidies that the poor get in this country. Nobody talks about the subsidies that the corporates get in this country. We are moving from a position of welfare state to what I call as Company Raj. You know, from abandoning the role that it has to play, the state has to play for welfare of the poor, now it plays for the welfare of the corporates. You know, since 2004, the revenue foregone, which means the tax exemption given to the corporates, comes to 32 lakh crores. Nobody has ever said these subsidies need to be pruned. 32 lakh crores could have taken care of the entire hunger for several years in this country, or perhaps for several decades. And having said that, even if you look at the other you know, big subsidy that is cornered by the corporates every year, is in the form of the you know, the farm loans. This year the government has allocated 7 lakh crores, out of which only 50,000 crores goes to the small farmers, rest goes to the industry. So the industry is actually taking advantage of the subsidized loan that is being given to the farmers.
Instead of taking two extremes, why don't we look at this? Why don't we look at this?
Money, it is going to
I'm
the
just
wrong
saying,
place.
instead of taking the two extremes, you know, the corporates on one hand and the poor people on the other hand, why don't we look at this from the middle class standpoint? At the end of the day, it's the salaried middle class who's going to be paying for this bill. And you know, what is the middle class getting out of this? There's no universal coverage in this. You know, you're going to be driving up prices through MSP increases, and at the end of it all, you know, nobody would complain if all of this reaches the people it's supposed to reach to. But that's the big question: is it going to be channelized in the right manner? Are you sure about that?
Now, let me answer that question. You know, if the MSP is increasing, MSP in any case is going to increase year after year, because there has to be certain costs which have to be taken care of. So I think it's not just because of food security bill that the MSP is going to increase. Having said that, I think MSP is something which is dependent upon the external factors.
Mr. Sharma, if you increase MSPs, if you increase procurement for the public distribution system, people who are not part of the public distribution system or are not entitled to the public distribution system will essentially have to pay more for their rice and their wheat, simply because the stockpile in the system is going to reduce. I mean, it's demand supply.
No, I think it's a wrong assumption. It's a wrong assumption, because let me tell you, in India 60% are the farmers, and these are not only producers, they are also consumers. So what consumers, which consumer class that we are talking about? You know, these are the people who also need money in their hands. And in any case, 60 million tons of surplus every year requires MSP to go up, and we have to ensure that the farmers are not driven to the wall. I think there's nothing wrong in that. Middle class, let's not assume that the middle class is not willing to pay. Middle class is willing to pay. All it needs is good quality food at their doorstep.
Right, so we're completely running out of time, so just want to give Aditi the last word. You know, amid all of this, you know, the good, bad and the ugly of the bill, the big question now is, with what's happening at the centre with the DMK issue and so on, is this bill going to be passed? That's the big question. It was supposed to be tabled at 2 p.m. today. The Lok Sabha got adjourned. It may come up for discussion tomorrow. What's your sense? Is this going to be passed?
Oh, yeah, I don't think there's going to be any difficulty in passing the bill. The BJP has already said that they support it. I'm sure the left party
is in the mood to give the government so much credit ahead of the elections.
Well, it's not a question of credit. It's that people who hear them say that they are going to prevent food security from reaching the poor will file it away in the back of their mind and judge them later. So I think it would not be good politics to oppose the bill at this time, and they should, I'm sure they'll make speeches which will say that this bill doesn't go far enough, it should become even more radical, etc., etc.
Right. On that note, we'll have to wrap up this debate, completely out of time. Of course, let's see if the bill comes up for debate tomorrow. It's a critical legislation. In the next few days would decide if food security for all is cemented into law, whatever its flaws. A big thank you to all our guests for sharing their thoughts. We'll have to take a quick break. We come back with speed news on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're with We Mean Business, and here's a look at all the other top headlines of the day. It was another washout session for the market, but not before a bout of volatility. The markets raced up about 1% in the first half of trade to nosedive in the second, with both the Nifty and the Sensex closing with over 0.5% in losses. The broader markets in fact underperforming the benchmark indices with sharper losses, especially on the mid-cap counters. Here's a view on where the markets are headed going forward from Sanjeev Prasad, Senior ED and Co-Head of Kotak Institutional Securities, and of course Saurabh Mukherjee, Head of Equities at Ambit Capital.
People don't have confidence at this point in time, given a lot of political uncertainty to start with, which in turn raises a lot of question marks about whatever little hopes they were of recovery as far as the economy is concerned, maybe some earnings upgrades and some solution to India's macroeconomic challenges. Now suddenly people have become very concerned whether, because of political uncertainty, you will lose the time which India desperately requires to mend some of these issues. You're not seeing any earnings upgrades at this point in time, given the fact that the economy is slowing down. There was some hope that based on reform process, India could be in a position to reverse some of these adversities. But if the government does not even have the possibility to address some of these issues, I mean, obviously they are not going to be addressed. So that's where the problem is. Just whatever little confidence we were seeing in the economy, even that seems to be ebbing away now. Now the worry which is coming is the problems are still there, but the government does not have the time to address these issues, given the fact that most of the energy now focused on political factors rather than economic factors, which obviously require a lot of attention.
My reading is that domestic sentiment, domestic investor sentiment, retail investor sentiment in our country is very weak. Domestic fund flows are also fairly weak. On the other hand, however, I think the FII sentiment, based on what I saw when I traveled around Europe and America over the last fortnight, FII sentiment vis-a-vis India is fairly robust. Part of the reason, of course, is in the US you're seeing a massive rotation out of government bonds into equities, and that's helping global equities, including India. Now, my read is that with the RBI cutting fairly consistently through the year, with another 50 bips cut in May shouldn't be ruled out. The RBI cutting through the year, with the economy likely to recover in the early months of FY14.
That's the broader market view, but one specific stock that was in focus today was Tata Motors, down about 4%, and one of the top losers in the Nifty today, and that's largely because of the new green norms that were introduced in China, which is one of the biggest markets for JLR. Mithali Israni joins in with more details on what the potential impact of this could be on JLR.
Well, Tata Motors clearly one of the top Nifty losers today. Now, remember, this is because of the new China fuel efficiency norms that were issued yesterday, and these new emission norms yesterday are an extension of the draft norm that had come about 5 to 9 months back. Now, these new regulation norms aim at a 20% fuel economy drop from the phase 2 standards. Now, Tata Motors saw significant correction because China is a significant market for JLR, contributing almost 20% of the JLR revenue and almost 40% on the EBITDA level. I spoke to a couple of analysts, and most of the guys on the street are of the view that overall this would create sentiment negative development for JLR, because around 50% of its portfolio is in compliant with these norms which they need to adhere to, or which will kick in by 2015. But for the remaining 50%, the company will have to undergo additional capital expenditure to make these models compliant to the new fuel efficiency norms, and that is why we understand that the stock saw significant correction. However, the JLR management did comment saying that China sales would not get impacted, and the company will be making the required changes or the required changes in their remaining 50% of the model to make the vehicles compliant with those fuel efficiency norms.
Moving on, the Reserve Bank of India Deputy Governor K.C. Chakravarti today has spoken out on the Cobra Post sting on three of India's biggest private sector banks, that's ICICI, HDFC Bank and Axis. Mr. Chakravarti said that while no scam had happened and not a single transaction had in fact taken place, there was no question that there was a need for tighter KYC guidelines in the banking system. Asa Maheshri joins in to tell us what more.
RBI Deputy Governor today has clearly said that the allegations made by Cobra Post does not mean that the banks have flouted any norms, since not a single transaction had taken place. However, while the RBI has said that, the Deputy Governor has also said that the internal investigation processes have begun, and the banks and RBI has started scrutinizing process, and teams have been sent to the banks to investigate. Although RBI has also said that, in terms of KYC also, if there is a need to change or make the KYC norms more stringent, RBI is open to changing these KYC norms. Now, another issue that RBI has raised concerns on is bank branches selling other financial products like insurance, mutual funds and gold coins also. RBI has said that since this requires the involvement of multiple regulators, hence it is required to standardize the KYC norms, and hence for this also an integration, a more comprehensive integration is required, and hence thus RBI is saying that this is one of the areas which also needs more focus and more attention. Let's listen to what the RBI Deputy Governor had to say today.
Allegation does not mean the flouting, na? No. There is not a single transaction has taken place. Somebody says, I have killed 10 people. That does not mean they have to be prosecuted. Has any transaction taken place? You have seen? No. Matter over.
No, but RBI set up a committee, so you of course are looking.
And you see, KYC violation will happen in any system. Look, these are all transactional issues. It has nothing to do with the money laundering. These are all, you see, people may not be paying the tax and some money flows into the system. We have sufficient instruction to the banks how to avoid. So our people have gone for scrutinizing, and not only these banks, we do it for all other banks, and if you find that there is a need to further tighten our guidelines, we will do that.
So what's been the impact of this sting? Well, ICICI Bank, the largest private sector bank in the country, has appointed Deloitte India to conduct an independent inquiry into the allegations that the lender is one among the three private banks running a money laundering racket. The report is expected by the 31st of March. Here's Chanda Kochar speaking about that earlier.
We've really clarified all the steps that have been taken, including internal inquiry, appointment of Deloitte. So I think we will then speak again when the reports are out. How soon can we have said that 31st March the preliminary report will be.
Meanwhile, the government seems to be even more precariously poised than ever politically. In a bizarre turn of events today, the CBI raid at DMK leader M.K. Stalin's residence was called off after the PM and the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram strongly disapproved of the action. The raids were being carried out at Stalin's residence in Chennai and at 18 other places across Tamil Nadu in connection with a case of alleged tax evasion of imported cars. Chidambaram said that he did not approve the CBI raids, which came just 2 days after the DMK pulled out of the UPA government. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh meanwhile said that he was upset, but his government had no role.
I heard about it round about 8:30 in the morning. Normally I do not comment on the working of another department or another organization, but in this case I have to say I disapprove of the CBI's action. Whatever may be the reason, it should not have been done. It is bound to be misunderstood, and I've conveyed my strong views to the minister concerned.
Last thing says the government convinced that the DMK will listen, DMK will understand the logic of the government.
I hope that the DMK and AIDMK understand that despite government's best efforts, we are not able to persuade parties to adopt a resolution in Parliament.
And more political news, actor Sanjay Dutt has been sentenced to 5 years in jail by the Supreme Court. Dutt has been ordered to surrender within 4 weeks. The court said in its verdict the charges against Dutt in the 93 blasts were of a serious nature and the circumstances required them not to grant him probation. Dutt has already served 18 of the 6-year sentence passed by a Tara court for procuring an AK-56 rifle from gangster Abu Salim. That claimed his family had been threatened at the time and that he later had in fact destroyed the rifle. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has also upheld the death sentence of blast mastermind Yaqub Memon, and the death sentence of 10 convicts has been converted into life imprisonment. And that's a wrap then on this edition of We Mean Business. Thanks very much for watching. See you again tomorrow.